Okay, have you ever actually stopped to think about what it really takes to plan, move, and sustain an entire military force across an ocean? I mean, it's not just throwing some boots on the ground. It is a massive, incredibly chaotic jigsaw puzzle of logistics, communication, and real-time strategy. So, to really understand how this works, we are going to dive into a fascinating case study in this explainer, the 1987 Indian Peacekeeping Force, or IPKF, operation in Sri Lanka. Let's look at the true anatomy of an overseas deployment.
To make sense of all this, we're going to break it down into a logical timeline. We'll hit 1. The stage. 2. Strategic planning. 3. Command and forces. 4. The lifelines. 5. The induction. And finally, 6. The framework for success.
All right, let's dive right into part 1, the stage. India to Sri Lanka.
You really can't plan anything until you understand the geography, right? We're talking about projecting serious power across the Palk Strait. Just picture the sheer distances from southern India down into Sri Lanka. You've got these absolutely critical sea routes flowing out of Madras and Visakhapatnam, and vital air corridors stretching from mounting bases like Dindigul, Bagumpet, and Tiruchirappalli straight into the island. This isn't just a quick hop over the water. Setting this high-stakes geographical stage is literally the first step in figuring out how you are going to physically move and, crucially, sustain thousands of troops over open water.
Moving right along to part 2, strategic planning. Now, an operation of this scale absolutely doesn't just happen overnight. Planning actually kicked off back in April 1987. It always starts with a political requirement, which then cascades down into actionable military options. And the military had to be ready for literally anything, so they built 3 very specific contingency plans. First, an operation to reinstate the Sri Lankan government if there was a coup. Second, operations alongside the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, against Sri Lankan security forces. And third, operations against the LTTE to implement the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord. It was actually that third contingency that ultimately peaked and became the reality on the ground.
Which brings us to part 3, command and forces. This right here is the invisible architecture of the whole shebang. Any successful deployment rests on a rock-solid foundation, and that is built on 5 pillars: operational planning, intelligence, communications, logistics, and personnel. These 5 pillars formed the core of the Joint Operations and Intelligence Room, or JOIR. And what's actually brilliant about this is that this nerve center was set up at Headquarters Southern Command, but then they completely duplicated it in Madras. Why? Because you absolutely need that redundancy and seamless coordination when you're managing a massive deployment from afar.
And this perfectly illustrates the tri-service hierarchy they used. You got the overall force commander, who is the general officer commanding-in-chief of Southern Command. Beneath that, you have the component commanders, the Army's general officer commanding for one corps, the Navy's flag officer commanding the Eastern Fleet, and the Air Force's chief of staff for Southern Air Command. It's a perfect triad: Army, Navy, Air Force, all locking together under one unified command structure.
Now, what's really interesting about this is a super counterintuitive constraint they faced on who actually deployed. The 54 Infantry Division was inducted. They were the strategic reserve, specifically trained in amphibious and air landing operations, so they were perfect for the job. But Headquarters 1 Corps was completely left behind. No way, right? Why would they do that? Well, because this operation happened during the August to October campaign season, and India had to maintain a defensive balance on its western border with Pakistan. So despite planning to use a Corps' headquarters, strategic realities forced their hand and they had to adapt and leave it in situ.
Okay, on to part 4, the lifelines. Before a single pair of boots hits the ground, you've got to build these invisible lifelines. Think of this communication policy as an urgent web spun across air, sea, and land. You have these critical nodes linking Delhi, Madras, Jaffna, and Trincomalee. They layered satellite links with highly secure, long-range military frequencies. We're talking troposcatter and high-frequency networks, utilizing a burst error control system for long-haul ship-to-shore integrity. Add in secure VHF and UHF short-range networks, and boom, you have a multi-axial, multi-channel system connecting the Joint Operations Room in Madras directly to the beaches and airfields in Sri Lanka. Without this web, you don't have command. You just have total chaos.
Then we get to the heavy lifting: logistics. The crucial thing to remember here is that sustainment is just as vital as the actual movement. An Army maintenance area was set up in Madras to anchor a 5-step logistics chain: stocking, transporting, sea movement, air movement, and maintenance. But here is the massive catch they ran into. Security restrictions completely prevented the pre-positioning of stocks. The commander wanted everything ready to go, for sure, but they couldn't risk tipping their hand. So, the initial induction and maintenance literally had to be organized on the fly using existing resources from Southern Command. That made this chain incredibly strained right from day one.
All right, part 5, the induction. This is where things get real.
This is where all that planning suddenly turns into a breathless, high-adrenaline 72-hour physical deployment. On the night of July 29th into the 30th, 1987, the first formations just suddenly fly out from Dindigul, Bagumpet, and Tiruchirappalli. On July 30th alone, there's this massive surge. 34 transport aircraft and 2 huge IL-76 heavy-lift aircraft fly the division headquarters and the 47th and 91st Brigades directly into Palali Airfield. The very next day, a fleet of AN-32s drop in the 17 Parachute Field Regiment while naval ships begin deploying from the coast. It's an absolute torrent of movement, inducting the 54 Infantry Division entirely by air and sea, initially without their heavy armor.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where all those puzzle pieces landed across Sri Lanka. Pali Airfield took the brunt of the air inductions, division headquarters and 2 brigades right there. By sea, Kanakis and Thurai, or KKS Harbor, received the 1 Maratha light infantry along with the heavy T-72 tanks and BMP-2 infantry combat vehicles. Meanwhile, the 76th Infantry Brigade, which had practically raced by train all the way from Pune down to Madras, crossed by sea to land at Trincomalee with their heavy vehicles. Every single method of transport was just converging flawlessly.
Finally, part 6, the framework for success.
Let's synthesize all of this into a simple, memorable equation. Detailed planning plus tri-service jointness plus agile logistics plus redundant communication equals a successful deployment. This isn't just some 1980s history lesson, you know? This is the fundamental anatomy of projecting power. The IPKF operation showed us that even when you are starved of prep time, completely restricted from pre-positioning your stocks, and forced to literally leave a major headquarters behind, structural discipline makes the impossible possible. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. When you look at the immense, overstretched supply chains of modern global conflicts today, how many of those failures ultimately come down to ignoring just one of these exact 4 pillars?